Hi, I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. I am Laura Nichols, also known as Queen of the Pivot, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. So stay with me for the next hour, and I am going to help you ignite your life with unfiltered motivation. Each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, I'm going to be discussing some small but potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life you want to be living. Thanks for all those who have tuned in and are listening and are continuing to send messages about the podcast. This will be episode number 3, and I am loving it. And I would love to hear what you want to hear more about. But as of today, the topic was actually chosen by my 16-year-old. You know, lately he has just been so sweet, which if you have a teenager or have ever worked with teenagers, know that they can be very sweet and very salty. And so I never know what I'm going to get with him. But lately he's been very sweet. And almost every day he comes up to me and tells me how proud he is of me. And so that's been a really beautiful thing that I'm very grateful for. So when I asked him like what he thought I should talk about this week, I let him look in my book and choose a quote. And he said that what he thinks I do with people, the number one thing that he said that he thinks I do with my clients is help them be happy and help them be content. And so that is how we got this topic for today. It's from the book, and the quote from the book is, 2 things about contentment is that it's an inside job and it happens in the present moment. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is contentment and how we get there and how we use contentment to create the life we want to be living. The reality is, my guess, maybe this isn't true for you, but for most people I work with, myself included, contentment is something that we are all searching for. We want to create a life of contentment and we want to be enjoying our life. So the first thing I want to start with is really, what is contentment? So if contentment is an inside job, and it happens in the present moment, like the quote says, what does it mean? So simply put, contentment is a state of happiness and satisfaction. And I think in general, people could probably agree that that's how they want to be living their life. They want to be staying in a state of happiness and be satisfied with what things are going. And so let's talk about that. So for the first part of the episode, we're going to talk about the fact that that really contentment is an inside job. But here's the trick. Like, a lot of times society, culture really shows us that it's a trophy, right? Something that we're sort of aiming to get. And the reality is, like, it's not something like a video game that we're trying to unlock the next level to. Do they even go to next levels anymore? I'm not sure. But when I was growing up, you're always trying to get to the next level on a video game. But there's not any amount of leveling up. You know, it's not getting a promotion or moving into a bigger house or marrying the love of your life. That's not what's going to suddenly flip and switch on our contentment. And that's really a lie. And we've sort of been sold that lie since birth, right? Society wants us to believe that if we just check enough boxes, that we're going to find that contentment. We're going to find that peace. But it doesn't work that way, right? You're not going to wake up one day after achieving all of your goals and think, I'm done. I've officially achieved contentment. Like, that's not how it works. The truth is that contentment is really an inside job, right? We don't get it from outside accomplishments. We don't find it in the perfect job or the dream house or having enough money in our bank account. And don't get me wrong, some of those things are nice extras, right? But if you're waiting for the day when things are going to be just right, and then therefore you're just going to be all of a sudden content, you're really setting yourself up for a lifetime of frustration. Life is never perfect, right? Life is messy. If you're chasing contentment through your circumstances, you're just going to be on a hamster wheel and it honestly will never stop spinning because life just keeps lifing. Things just keep happening. Some really good things happen, yeah, but also some really sucky things happen. And so if we are looking to find contentment from the outside of us, we are just going to be frustrated the majority of our life. So let's break it down a little bit further. Like a lot of people will say, like, I'll be happy when I get that job, or I'll be content when I meet the right person. I'll be at peace when I can finally retire and move to a tropical island, right? Spoiler alert. When you get to those things, you'll be happy for about 5 minutes before your brain goes, okay, what's next? Because external contentment is fleeting. If you are basing your contentment on the external, once that feeling dissipates, your brain's going to go, what's next? It's like a sugar rush, right? You eat all that sugar, you do all that stuff to make you happy, and then you get a quick high and then it crashes, right? So it's really important to know that we can't continue chasing contentment because not only is it fleeting, but that's also exhausting. Like if you're continually on this hamster wheel, eventually you're going to be exhausted. It's like running a marathon with no training, and your legs are like, now what do I do? Because I'm so tired. So when we're looking for contentment from the outside, um, you're actually pushing it further away. Right. And here's the kicker. There's always another goal around the corner. So it's just a never ending cycle. It's just a continuous hamster wheel. So like, for instance, let's talk about those of us who were working up, the corporate ladder. That wasn't me. I was a school counselor. But those of us who were like working to start at entry level, continuing to move up, starting to manage people, becoming directors. I actually work with a lot of clients who have done this. They have worked and worked and worked and worked and worked up their way in their corporate world. And all of a sudden they're like, I'm just not happy, right? Their job is not actually giving them contentment because the reality is you get there and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, what's next? I finally got to this level. I'm like, what am I going to do now? You've conditioned yourself to believe that contentment comes from constant achievement. So you're always looking for the next hit and the next hit. And eventually that's not going to be something that can feed you anymore. It's kind of like being addicted to the pursuit of more success, more stuff, more approval from others. But here's the key. You already have everything you need to be content right now. So we got to stop looking on the outside. We have to start going internally. Contentment doesn't care about your title, your bank balance, or whether you've got your life together on paper, right? It's all about how you feel on the inside. We got to stop running ourselves ragged, trying to control the uncontrollable, because let's face it, majority of things in life, besides how we react, are uncontrollable. We don't control life. We sort of trick ourselves into thinking that we do. I remember having babies, and that was like the very first lesson that I learned was that I was not in control of this little being, right? I could do all the things, have all the nap schedules, have all the feeding schedules, but like if they didn't want to nap, that wasn't going to happen. If they didn't feel like eating, that wasn't going to happen, right? So the very first lesson that I got as a parent was that I was not in control. And that was a really important lesson that I've carried on into my many, my 16 years later, that I'm not in control. And then that moved on to other parts of my life and realizing that all I could do was sort of react, to what was coming instead of continually running. So I think the key is to understand that we can't control the uncontrollable, right? Maybe it's time to pause and take a breath and realize that contentment is coming from inside of us. You know, the thing about looking for contentment on the outside is that society sort of gives us this like checklist, right? It's plastered all over social media. And the key is it's a little hidden. You don't necessarily see it. But every social media post that you see or self-help books, like a lot of conversations we have with people who think that they've got life figured out, it goes like, okay, once you hit these milestones, once you do this, you're going to be really happy. So tick off the boxes, right? We are looking for external validation, that new car, right? The partner, if we don't have a partner, um, or climbing the career ladder, buying the fancy car, and you make it. And then all of a sudden, like you think, wait, why am I not content? Because these boxes are fake, excuse me, but they're a load of crap, right? The minute that you tick one off, society is going to hand you a new checklist and say, you bought the house, cool. Now it's time to upgrade it, right? You got that dream job, fantastic. But are you making enough money? You found the love of your life, awesome. But when are you getting married? Oh, you're married now? Great. When are you having kids, right? The goalposts keep moving. And suddenly contentment just becomes this really elusive thing that's just always out of reach. We've really become conditioned to believe that happiness and peace are things that we can acquire or buy, like it's a shiny prize. If we hustle hard enough, we'll get it, but that's just not how it works. Contentment is a choice that we make every day, regardless of what's going on around us. It's about deciding where you are right now and deciding that that's enough and that who you are right now is enough. So I like to call this the if only trap, right? Sometimes we all get stuck here at some point waiting for the next thing to happen, right? Like, if only I made more money, if only I had a bigger house, if only I could lose 10 pounds, if only this, if only that, right? Does that sound familiar to you? It does to me. But the problem with that mindset is that we're always one step away from contentment, right? We're constantly putting our happiness on hold, telling ourselves that I'm going to be at peace when X, Y, and Z happens. But the if only trap is a lie. No matter how or what your external circumstances are, they're going to change. And so contentment is never guaranteed, right? Contentment isn't about what happens, it's about how you respond. I want to repeat this statement because it's so super important. Contentment isn't about what happens, it's about how you respond to what happens, right? You think of that person who's like super annoying because they never get rattled, right? Their kid spills the juice and they say no worries. They maybe spill something on their shirt. They're like, oh, I'll just change my shirt, right? And these are people who have cultivated a sense of contentment and peace on the internal. And sometimes when you're so focused on the external giving you contentment, it can be really frustrating because these people are so at peace. But I've chosen to surround myself with these people, and man, is it a beautiful life with these people around. So you can have every success in the world and still feel like there's something missing, right? We got to look internally. And so as we move forward in this episode, there's a couple things I want to think about. I'm going to end every segment with some questions. So before we end this segment, a couple questions for you to think about. What external goals are you currently chasing in the hopes that they'll bring contentment? Are they really what you need to feel fulfilled, right? How often do you catch yourself in the if only trap? What's the one way you stop waiting for external circumstances to change and start finding contentment in the present? Okay. And then I want you to think of a time when you achieved something that you thought would make you happy and it didn't last, right? And how does that affect your view of contentment? All right. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to explore more about contentment and how to find it internally. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach. Stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, Queen of the Pivot. Today, we're going to be talking about the reality of contentment from the Notes from Your Coach book. But before we continue, I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to contact me if you're interested in knowing more about what I do and my work. You can find me on the show notes, or you can go to my website, which is notesfromyourcoach.com. I made it super easy, same name as the book and same name as the podcast. If you want to go on there, I put a quiz on there, a free quiz for you to take to find out if you're ready to pivot and how ready you are. And then if you want to work with me, all the information is there to reach out to me as well. So before we were just talking about contentment and the idea that there's a myth behind the fact that it's externally driven. Here's the thing. So contentment is an inside job. It's all about our internal environment. It's not about having the perfect life or a fat bank account or the flawless Instagram feed, right? Those are nice, but that's not where contentment lives. So if we're really striving for contentment, which to go back to our definition is that feeling of peace and happiness, right? Contentment is about how you feel about yourself, your mindset, and your emotional state. So your relationship with yourself is really the foundation of finding contentment in your life. So do you have any of those friends who are constantly criticizing themselves, right? Or comparing themselves to others or feeling like they're not enough? Or is that you maybe, right? I know I've been there before where I'm comparing myself to others and criticizing myself, right? It doesn't matter how much you achieve externally, if that's the case, you're never going to feel content, right? Think about it like this. Your internal dialogue is really like the soundtrack of your life, right? So if it's all negative and full of self-doubt, how can you possibly expect to feel peace? You're basically living with an internal heckler. That's why part of my job as a coach, I think, is to be a cheerleader for my clients. And I was just talking to a previous client yesterday who I had worked with last year. And this is the biggest compliment that anyone could ever give me as a coach, honestly. She said that she still hears my voice in her head and uses it. And that is one of my very favorite tools for people is to borrow the voice of somebody who is your biggest cheerleader. Because how much more beautiful is it to have that voice in your head than a heckler, right? So if you're in a place where your brain is giving you a lot of thoughts about yourself that aren't very pretty and frankly, you would never say to somebody like one of your loved ones, then borrow the voice of your biggest fan, right? And if you don't have one, borrow mine, right? Like listen to this podcast, think about the things that I would say, and then borrow my voice, right? Because without it, it's like living in a house with the most luxurious furniture, but the roof's leaking, the walls are crumbling, and the whole place smells like really funky. So you might have some nice stuff. You might have that car, right? You might have the nice furniture. You might have the china. But at the core, it doesn't feel happy to be there, right? You're never going to feel good in a space like that. It's the same with your life. You have to fix the foundation, which is your mindset and your emotional well-being before you can really settle into contentment, right? So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. Perception is everything, right? The way you perceive your current situation can drastically change your level of contentment. It's like wearing sunglasses, right? If you've got a pair of dark, gloomy sunglasses on, everything's going to look grim. But if you switch those lenses out for a pair that have some clarity, or maybe your lenses are dirty and you wipe them off and they're clean, positive, the whole world looks brighter, right? I always like to say to my kids to shift their perspective, and I'll give you an example. When I nag them to clean up their room, which happens way too often because their rooms get messy very easily, I always say, it looks great. Now shift your perspective. And what I mean by that is get down on the ground. What's under the bed, right? Shifting our perspective changes what we see. And it's no different with our mindset. So let's think about this for a second. There's always going to be something that you want more of in life, right? Whether more money, more success, more recognition. But shifting your focus to what you already have can change everything. So you're shifting your perspective, right? So I was having this discussion with a friend last night. How do you remain content while still striving for goals? So I'm not talking about giving up on your dreams, right? I'm talking about appreciating where you are right now, even as you're striving for more. And so this is sort of what I was thinking. It's sort of like, let's say you have this really big goal, something you want to accomplish. And let's liken it to the top of a mountain. So you're hiking up this mountain and it is hard work, right? Every so often you take a break, right? Because you have been working really hard. You stop, you stretch, you look around you, you notice the beautiful flowers, you notice how far you've come, you get some water, you take care of yourself. Now, that doesn't change the fact that you're still walking up a mountain, right? You're still setting yourself up to reach those goals, but you're also spending time to be happy with where you are and notice where you are, right? Life isn't perfect. It's messy, it's unpredictable. Sometimes Sometimes it's like super frustrating. But if we can learn to be content in the mess and to appreciate where we are now while still working towards what's next, that's the superpower, right? It's realizing that we're standing in a garden that's still growing instead of waiting for every single flower to bloom. It's noticing that the view from where you are on the mountain is gorgeous, right? Even though you're still trying to get to the precipice of it. If you're constantly focused on what you're lacking, if you're saying, well, I'm not to the top of the mountain yet, I'm not to the top of the mountain yet, right? You're always going to feel discontent. But if you start shifting your attention to what's good, where you're at, what's currently working, what's abundant, right? That's where contentment starts to feel a lot closer to you. It's not about giving up on wanting more, right? Like there's nothing wrong with wanting a better life, with wanting to create new things, with chasing those dreams. If there were, I wouldn't be a coach, right? Like my clients are wanting to reach goals. It's not about sitting like in the Zen-like state, completely satisfied with everything and having zero ambition, right? Honestly, that would probably be pretty boring. You can be absolutely content while still wanting to grow and achieve and go after new things. But the trick is not letting the desire for more ruin the peace with where you currently are. Contentment isn't an absence of wanting. You can still want things. It's the ability to want while still being at peace with where you're at. So think about it for a second. You can still have big goals. You can still have big dreams and hunger for more, but you don't have to let the pursuit of those things steal your contentment in the present moment. You don't need to wait until you've made it to feel good about your life. So you could think about it like we talked about going up a mountain. You could also think about it as a pit stop, right? You're driving down the road, a really long highway, and you think about where you're going and sort of as this road to success. But guess what? You pull over, you stretch your legs, you refuel, you appreciate how far you've come, then you get back on the road and you keep driving, right? The key really is to not miss the beauty of the journey because you're so obsessed with getting to the destination. You can enjoy the ride and still be excited about it. So one of my biggest tools that I like to use and that I teach my clients, and this was another gift that my previous client gave to me when I talked to her yesterday. She said that this is something that she puts into practice still daily with her partner, and I think it's really beautiful. And that is understanding the role of gratitude and all that, right? So I want you to stop right now, and I want you to think about one thing, just one thing that you're grateful for right now. It could be something really big, like your health or your family, or it could be something small, like you had a really killer cup of coffee this morning, right? Or maybe the weather's finally cooling down. It's September and it's definitely cooler here in North Carolina. But whatever it is, I want you to like really lean into that feeling of gratitude, right? Gratitude is such a beautiful tool for finding contentment. So I want you to think about that one thing and I want you to carry it with you. And as you get stressed or anxious or feeling like you're not doing enough, I want you to bring your mind back to that thing that you thought of, right? Let it anchor you to the present moment. Because contentment isn't about things being perfect. It's about recognizing that even in chaos, there's still things that we can be grateful for. So as you go through your day, I want you to notice how that small shift in your focus can change your mindset. Notice how it makes you feel a little more content, a little more at peace, even if nothing in your external circumstances has changed, right? Because the external circumstances, they're just going to keep flowing. They're not in our control. But the power of the gratitude is a major key to unlocking the contentment here and now as you are headed towards those big goals. So as we did before, I'm going to give you some questions as we close out this statement that I want you to think about. So here we go. What's one area of your life where you've been chasing external validation instead of looking inward for contentment, right? How can you shift your perspective today to focus on what you already have rather than what you're still striving for? What's one small thing you're grateful for right now? And how can you use that gratitude to anchor yourself in the present moment? And in what ways are you allowing the pursuit of more to interfere with your peace? And how can you balance ambition with contentment? I work over and over and over with clients who have gone up the corporate ladder, have created a beautiful family, have retired, or high schoolers who are trying to finish high school. And at some point, all of them get to this place where they are like, why am I not happy? Why am I not content? I've done all of these things. And so it's really normal to get to a place where you realize that you have to go internal for contentment, and starting to put together these practices of gratitude, and staying present are super important. So we're going to talk more about the second part of the quote in the next segment, about what it looks like to the role of presence as far as finding contentment goes. So I'm Laura Nichols. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach. We will be back to talk more about contentment. Stay tuned. Hey, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, the queen of the pivot. And we are here talking about the quote, 2 things to know about contentment is that it's an inside job and it happens in the present. And then how to use that quote to step into that quote to transform your life. So we spent the first part of this episode really talking about how contentment is an inside job and not something that we find externally. Although some of those external things can be really nice and we can have goals, really it's about finding contentment from the inside, and that's how you find it and keep it. So the second part of the quote that we really want to dive into is the fact that contentment only exists in the present, right? You cannot be content in the past or the future because those are just mental constructs. So this is going to get a little bit mind bendy here for those of you who haven't really thought about this before. But if you have, then you're probably a big fan of like Eckhart Tolle, who talks a lot about remaining present. But past and future are just constructs that our brain creates to like explain our stories to us, right? But the reality is, if you think about it, the past is over, right? And the future hasn't even happened yet. So it doesn't make any sense to waste time and energy living in the past or the future, right? If we spend our days replaying old scenarios or cringing at embarrassing moments or regrets that we had, or we spend every day planning the details of the future, we're not enjoying the present. And there's no way to find contentment there. And plus, that's exhausting. I can't imagine carrying that backpack around all the time. So what happens? If you're like me, sometimes you get stuck in your head, right? And when that happens, you have to recognize that you're really missing out on life. Because when we're stuck in our head, we can't be happy or content with what's currently happening. So if we're thinking about that disaster that happened last week, with our partner, or the fight that we had, or we're constantly worried about what next week looks like, we're not living in the current now. So we're literally spending now worrying about the mental constructs of the past or the future. Contentment is here in this very moment. Most of us are so caught up in our mental time machines that we don't notice what's right in front of us. Think about the fact that when you drive your car to the grocery store, sometimes you all of a sudden go, I don't know how I got here, right? Because you weren't living in the moment, you were living in your head. And our brain can do amazing things like that, but it's hard to find contentment if we're just constantly listening to the noise in our head. So I want you to think about it this way. Imagine that you're trying to read a book. And sometimes this can be challenging for some of us. But every few seconds, you flip back to a random chapter that you've already read, or you jump forward to a page you haven't reached yet. But that would completely ruin the experience of reading this book, right? You would completely miss the flow of the story. You're trying to be in a chapter, but you keep looking back, or you just jump forward, right? How can you enjoy how the story unfolds? And that's exactly what happens when we let our minds wander to past or future instead of being in the present. The present moment is where the magic happens. It's where contentment lives. So how do we bring ourselves back to the now? All right, here we go. I don't think this is woo-woo, but I'm just going to warn those of you who aren't into this kind of thing that this might be difficult. So this is where mindfulness comes in, right? I'm not saying that you have to sit cross-legged on a mountain and meditate for hours, right? That's not really what mindfulness means. Mindfulness is really about being aware of the present moment. It's one of the most effective tools for finding contentment. When we practice mindfulness, what you're doing is you're training your brain to focus on what is instead of what was or what might be in the future, right? It's a powerful way to release anxiety we feel about the future or regrets that we carry in the past. It's like having a mental workout. So every time you bring your attention back to the present, you're building that muscle, like physical exercise. The more you do it, the stronger you get. And I really recommend practicing mindfulness when you're at a state of ease. Because when we practice mindfulness, when we're at ease, it's easier to use when we are caught up or anxious or sitting with regret. Let's say you're walking outside. Instead of mentally running through your to-do list or replaying that awkward conversation you had yesterday, what if you just, I don't know, walked? What if you tuned into the sound of your footsteps, the feeling of the breeze on your skin, or the smell of the air? That's what mindfulness is. And in those moments, you're not thinking about the past or the future. You're just being, right? That is where contentment lives. So here's the thing, and this is hard for some of us to admit, but most of us are never, ever really here, like in the moment. We're constantly thinking about what's next or what we should have done differently. How often do you find yourself in a conversation with someone, but your mind is a million miles away, planning either how you're going to respond, what you're going to have for dinner, or stressing about tomorrow's deadline? Like you're physically there, but mentally you're gone. You've already left the building. So the problem with this is that when you're not fully present, you're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to feel content, right? We're so focused on what we need to do or what we regret not doing that we miss the beauty and the peace that is right now. It's like watching a movie, but fast forwarding through the good parts because you're too busy worrying about the ending. So when we're talking about contentment, mindfulness is a powerful, powerful tool. So this is what I want you to try. The next time you catch your mind wandering, I want you to pull it back to the present, right? There's no judgment there. You're just noticing, right? Notice what's going on around you. Notice the sights, the sounds, the smells, the sensations, right? When we say ground yourself, like pulling yourself into the now, knowing where you are physically in this present moment. It's not easy when you first try doing it, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. The more you realize that the present moment is actually where our peace resides. So you know you can't control the future and you can't change the past, but you can be right here in this present moment right now. And that is really where contentment lives. All right, so let's get practical here for a second. I'm going to do something on this podcast that I haven't done before, but I'm going to lead you through a short guided mindfulness practice. So for those of you who haven't done mindfulness before, this is going to be easy, right? This is going to be something that you're going to be able to take with you and put in your pocket and use. And for those of you who have done mindfulness a ton, same, you're going to be super familiar with this. Now, don't do this while you're driving. So if you're driving, either pull over, pause the podcast and do this another time. All right. But this is what we're going to do. This is what's going to help you come back to the present to find contentment. And what you're going to do first is you're going to find a comfortable position. You don't need to sit cross-legged or anything fancy. You can sit or you can stand, anything that feels comfortable. All right. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to focus on your breath. So close your eyes if that feels right for you, right? You could just soften your gaze. You're going to start by taking a few deep breaths. You're going to inhale slowly through your nose, hold it for 1 second, and then exhale slowly through your mouth, right? Do this a few times and let your mind sort of settle. Now, keep in mind that your mind might be trying to feed you thoughts, and that's okay. Don't judge it. Just let it happen. Your brain's doing its job. Now, I want you to notice your sensations, right? Shift your attention to your body. What do you feel? Is there a chair under you? Are you standing? Is the ground under your feet? Is there air on your skin? Did you notice the sensations without judgment. Next, I want you to tune into the sounds. What do you hear? Is it quiet? Are there subtle noises around you? Maybe birds, traffic, or the hum of a nearby appliance. Or if you're like me, I'm listening to my dog breathing right now. Just listen. All right. And now I want you to bring that one thing to mind that you're grateful for, right? We talked about it before. It can be simple. It could be the fact that you're breathing or that you had this moment right now to yourself. I want you to feel what it feels like to have that gratitude and then hold on to it for a moment. Okay. So super easy. This is something that all of us can do, and we can practice it once a day when things aren't too hectic, right? That is how you bring yourself into the present moment. These little pauses that we find this type of contentment that we're talking about. It's not like some big life-changing thing or hitting some milestone. It's about being here in the here and now. So just like we did before, I'm going to give you a couple reflection questions. One, I want you to think about when was the last time you were fully present in a moment. When you were in that moment, how did it feel? Right? Did it feel hectic? Did it feel peaceful? What did it feel like when you were fully immersed in that moment? What are some external distractions that pull you out of the present moment, and how can you minimize them? Right? What are some things that are kind of like, I'm going to use the T word, triggers for you that really easily pull you out? So for me, for instance, this would be my kids. They pull me out of the present moment a lot. They also anchor me back into the present moment. So they're a beautiful gift for that as well. And so what I do in the moments where I get pulled out of the present by them is I just remind myself to shift my focus onto what they're saying. And I really try to lean in and listen. 3, how often do you find yourself living in the past or future, right? What steps can you take to ground yourself in the now rather than living in yesterday or tomorrow or later today? And then what's one thing you can focus on right now that would help you feel more content in the present moment? So these are all tools that you can use, being mindful, learning a mindfulness practice as you learn to find contentment. So we're going to take another break. This is Laura Nichols, the Queen of the Pivot, with Notes from Your Coach. When we return, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, the real work, the how do we do it. So stay tuned. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach. I'm Laura Nichols, the Queen of the Pivot, and we are talking about contentment and the quote that contentment is an inside job and it happens in the present. So the last part of our time together, I want to talk about how to overcome these common blocks to contentment, right? Like, where are we finding these blocks? How do we get through them? And how do we find contentment in our daily life? So one of the very first blocks that I think is important to recognize as an enemy of contentment is perfectionism, right? Let's talk a little bit about perfectionism. So perfectionism is like that friend who's always nitpicking you, telling you that nothing you do is ever good enough. Gosh, I hope you don't have a friend like this. And that contentment is reserved for the day you finally achieve perfection. And here's the problem with perfection. And I've talked about this before, but there's no such thing, right? Perfection doesn't actually exist. It's a myth that we've bought into and been sold by society, and it keeps us in a constant state of dissatisfaction. But why is it a myth, right? Because the goalposts keep moving, and what's quote unquote perfect for one person is not going to be perfect for somebody else. It tells you to keep pushing for more and that what you've done isn't good enough. And how can you possibly find contentment when you're constantly pushing for more and telling yourself you're not good enough? When we tell ourselves that contentment is just around the corner, and once we fix that one last thing, we're going to get there. But the corner keeps moving, right? You could spend your whole life chasing it and you're still never going to feel content. So perfectionism is a major enemy of contentment. And the irony in all of it is that perfectionism doesn't actually lead to success. It only leads to burnout, right? And stress. and the constant feeling of not being enough. So it's actually the opposite of contentment. Um, no matter how hard you try, there's always something you're going to have to improve through the lens of perfectionism. So the enemy of contentment isn't failure, it's the endless pursuit of perfection. So what if, just hear me out, what if instead of striving for perfection, you accept the idea that good enough is good enough? And here's a little tip for those of us, and I'm including myself in this, I'm a recovering perfectionist. For those of us who have taken the time to strive for perfection in the past, I would argue that if you tried for a B or a C, we're talking about the old school grading scale. If you were still in school, A, B, C, D, F, your B or C would probably be somebody else's A, right? So for those of us who struggle with perfection, right, lean into that B or C, right? Good enough is good enough. Try for that, right? So another enemy of contentment is social media, right? Social media can do so many beautiful things. Some of you found me through social media. But it also can rob us of peace, right? Because there's a comparison trap that happens. So if perfectionism doesn't get you, then comparison might. It's the ultimate contentment killer. And I'll tell you why. We scroll through all these beautiful feeds of perfect poses and probably edited photos, and gosh, now AI created photos, which is a little scary. But they're all filtered. Everything that we see on social media is filtered in some way. And so it makes us feel like we're falling short. So why don't I have that life? Why isn't my career taking off like hers? Why is their relationship so much more romantic than mine? Side note, I'm a kind of a believer that if someone's always flashing their relationship on social media, there's probably a big problem there. That's what I've noticed. I'm not saying all the time, but if there's a lot of uh odes to your partner, it always just makes me wonder if you guys are okay. But the thing is, we're not even necessarily, even if we put ourselves as naturally on social as we can, right? There's still algorithms at play, and we're not even shown everything. So even those of us who try to show up authentically and normally, oftentimes that's not necessarily what gets shown. You're being shown edits of a life. And so when you start to compare yourself, your real life, to somebody's highly curated life, you're going to feel like you fall short. Social media is just a highlight reel, right? You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's movie trailer, essentially. You're not seeing arguments, you're not seeing doubts, you're not seeing all the failed attempts, right? When I put a video on social, like a lot of times I try to do it raw in the first take, but there's times when I may do it 5 times before I throw it on there. You're not seeing all those raw attempts. You're just seeing the naturally curated stuff that I've put up there, the polished version, right? So we still use other people's illusions to measure our own worth, and it leaves us feeling inadequate and frustrated. But someone else's success doesn't diminish your own. So let's say maybe it's not a polished reel and really they're having a really good day. Their hair looks amazing. They're on an amazing trip. They're really happy in their life. That doesn't change yours, right? When you're focused on other people and comparison and comparing your life to other people, it diminishes contentment. And contentment is really hard to find when you're looking at somebody else's journey rather than your own. You're not in a race, the same race as anyone else. And I think that that's really important. So letting go of comparison is important. Your path is your own. You're the only person that you should be comparing yourself to. Just you and where you're at. Maybe the version of yourself from yesterday, right? That's it. When you focus on your own growth, that mountain in front of you that you are climbing up, right? That's where your contentment lies. It's not anything you need to chase because it's already there because your mountain is your own. All right. You've heard me say it before, but I'm going to talk about it again. Another enemy of contentment is limiting beliefs, right? The limiting belief of we don't deserve contentment, right? Limiting beliefs keep us from contentment. We have those sneaky little thoughts that whisper, you don't deserve to be happy until you've achieved X, Y, and Z, right? And a lot of times these beliefs are really tricky to catch because they're ingrained in us from childhood and maybe through or societal expectations, right? We're taught that happiness is a reward for hard work, for reaching certain situations, for doing more. But that's not how it works. Like contentment isn't something that you have to earn, right? Like you don't have to, I don't know, write a book and then be content. You don't have to buy that car and then be content. You don't have to lose that 10 pounds and then be content. You get to be content exactly where you are. Guess what? Because you're worthy. You are a spiritual being, have a human experience, and you are worthy of contentment right here and now. You don't have to be rich enough, thin enough, successful enough, or whatever enough. Anything that you've got in your head, that's all BS, right? The idea that you need to achieve something in order to be content, like that's a lie. A limiting belief that keeps you stuck in the grind, always striving, never arriving. But you deserve to feel content right now, exactly as you are in this moment. So, how do we break free from these limiting beliefs that are keeping us in discontent? We challenge them, right? So it's really important. And one of the first things that I do with my clients is I teach them to pay attention to the thoughts their brain is giving them, right? So as your brain gives you thoughts, you start to notice them. And then next time you catch yourself thinking something like, I can't be happy until, I want you to think, who told you that? Is it true? Or is it a belief that you've picked up somewhere along the way? Okay, here's a spoiler alert. It's probably not true. Most of the things that we think are true are not. They're just thoughts, right? So self-compassion here is the key. Being kind to yourself when you're in moments of discontent, because you're not going to feel content all the time, right? We talked about this earlier. I'm not talking about sitting on your butt on top of a mountain in a Zen-like state, right? That's not what contentment is. Life happens, circumstances happen. Sometimes you're going to feel like a mess. That's okay, right? The key to overcoming discontent isn't to beat ourselves up. It's to practice self-compassion. When those moments of frustration, self-doubt, or dissatisfaction hit us, your first instinct might be to criticize yourself. Gosh, why am I feeling this way? I should be happier. Like I've been working on being content. I should be further along than this, right? Guess what? That's not going to lead to contentment either, right? Instead of judging yourself, what if you showed yourself some grace, right? Treat yourself like you would a friend with kindness and understanding, right? Recognize that you're human, that everyone struggles, and it's okay not to have it all together. When you practice self-compassion, you create space for contentment, even in the messy and imperfect moments. And guess what? They're all imperfect. We talked about this before. There's no such thing as perfection. All right, here's a challenge for you. So I want you to think about shifting your focus by reflecting. So I want you to think about one area of your life where you feel like you should, hate that word, but you should be further along, right? Maybe it's your career, your relationships, your health, whatever it is, I want you to think about it. Now, instead of focusing on what's missing or where you're failing, we're going to shift your focus or your perspective onto what's working, right? What can you appreciate about this situation right now? What progress have you made, even if it's small? So let's say, for instance, that you are in a job and you feel like you should be the big boss by now, right? But you're not. What can you look at in your career that says, you know what, like I'm actually really grateful for this moment right here? Like, for instance, I get to go home at 5 o'clock because I'm not the big boss, right? Or I'm making at least this amount and I never thought that I would make it, right? Where are you making progress? Even if it's tiny, right? I want you to take this week to let go of a should, right? And replace it with the gratitude. I hate shoulds. I think it's a word that we shouldn't use. I see the irony there. But should is just full of judgment. So if we can replace that should with gratitude for where we're at, not letting go of our goals, right? We're still striving, but we're also finding contentment in the now where we are and not comparing ourselves to others, knowing that we're good enough exactly where you are. That's where your money is, right? So as you move forward and as you think about finding contentment within yourself in this moment, I want you to think of my voice and I want you to think about the fact that you are enough, right? We don't have to chase contentment. It's not an external achievement, right? You're never going to find contentment anywhere else within yourself. You don't have to wait till tomorrow to feel it. We're going to start today. As you step back into your human journey, remember this week's unfiltered motivation from this episode of Your Notes from Your Coach, right? I want you to pivot boldly. I want you to live fully. You've got this. In case you need a reminder, you're a badass. Keep rocking it. Until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and remember the power of the pivot. If you want to contact me, you can go to my website, notesfromyourcoach.com. All my info is on the contact page, and you can sign up for my monthly newsletter there as well. I want to thank you all for listening, for writing in. Please join me every first and third Monday at 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific time. And have a great week. I'll see you back here next time. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more notes from your coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on a tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.